This is a lore video of a HOI4 mod called Age of Imperialism, so credit to the original creators. So it's June 28th, 1914, and Archduke Franz Ferdinand gets whacked by some Serbian nationalists. Now, Austria-Hungary, not one to miss a chance to throw around their weight, decides to give Serbia an ultimatum that basically says, be our puppet or else. And Serbia's like, nah, we're good thanks. And just like that, Austria declares war. Kaiser Wilhelm II, instead of canceling his planned vacation to Norway, because Europe was imploding and all that, just decided to go anyway. While he is sipping on mead and enjoying the fjords, he gets wind of Austria's ultimatum to Serbia. He reads it, rolls his eyes, and writes a letter calling Austria warmongers. But by the time he sends it, it's too late. Austria's already declared war, and the general staff and the German parliament already gave full support to Austria, backing them up. But in this alternative timeline, Wilhelm II canceled his vacation, and in turn, Germany's support for Austria, since he actually stayed involved in the situation. And just like that, the Central Powers are kaput. But German support meant nothing for the Austrian warmonger faction under Konrad von Hotzendorf, which, in their lust for glory and influence, decided to attack Serbia anyways, despite the risk of a Russian response. But guess what? Serbia is not rolling over that easily. The Austrian army, thinking they're the hot stuff, gets stuck in a stalemate. Turns out the Austrian military is just about as effective as trying to cut a Wiener Schnitzel with a plastic knife. Meanwhile, Russia is basically telling Austria to F off, but Konrad von Hotzendorf just tells everyone not to worry since he has another offensive that will surely take out Serbia, and then everyone can focus on beating off the Russians. Well, that fails, and Russia invades anyways, quickly moving into Galicia and the Carpathian Mountains. But the Austrians do come up with a plan B, giving a shitload of guns to the Polish and Ukrainian separatists to keep the Russians busy, and also getting Bulgaria on their side by promising them a part of Serbia. With this, Austria decides that it's time for a grand counteroffensive against the Russians. And they just end up humiliating themselves since their troops are poorly equipped and undertrained. Not to mention, most don't even speak the same language as one another. Italy and Romania, seeing an opportunity to kick a dog while it's down, join on the side of the Russians. With the Russians now in Budapest, Austria sees the writing on the wall and surrenders. The resulting treaty forces a partial partition of Austria, along with heavy reparations requirement. Meanwhile, on the other side of Europe, tensions were high over Germany and France, fighting over Alsace-Lorraine, once again due to the Severn affair, which was in 1913, when a German lieutenant decides it's a great idea to publicly insult the French folks living in the Alsace-Lorraine region, because of course that's how you get the locals to love you. Naturally, the French, who are still salty about losing land in the Franco-Prussian War, are not very thrilled. The German military, always the charmers, respond with arrests and harsh treatment, because why not add fuel to the fire, right? This quickly turns into a full-blown diplomatic crisis, with France demanding back the territory. Germany says 9, and war breaks out. Now, this German field marshal named Alfred von Schlieffen comes up with a plan to just get around the French defenses by invading through Belgium, to which the Kaiser tells him that's a very stupid idea, since that would pull Britain into the war. It doesn't matter though, since the Germans easily win the first battles of the war, sending the French back to Paris. Only then do the French manage to somewhat hold back the Germans, and yay, we get trench warfare. Unfortunately for the French though, the soldiers were tired after a few months of this and threatened to mutiny, so the French government was forced to sign an armistice in 1916. Germany then forces the French to give up a bunch of colonies and to pay war reparations.
Back east, the Russians turned their eyes to Bulgaria and the Ottoman Empire. The Russians actually decided to not punish Bulgaria itself, and instead just place the blame on the royal family known as the Coburgs, and then put the king of Serbia on the Bulgarian throne, uniting them into the Balkan, spelt with a C, Federation, because multi-ethnic Balkan nations are always destined to last long and not disintegrate within 5 seconds. So even though the Ottomans did not enter the war, the Russians still wanted to screw with them. But lacking a good casus belli, they come up with a big-brain plan. Basically, they did a bunch of stuff to provoke their Muslim populations to rise up in a rebellion, then blamed the Ottomans for stirring up said uprisings. After defeating the uprisings, the Russians attacked the Ottoman Empire. Britain sees this and begins to worry, since they saw the Ottomans as a neutral shield between their colonies and Russia. However, they don't want to waste supporting the Ottomans, since the writing was kinda on the wall. And seeing a good opportunity for the British national pastime of colonization, they instead just began supporting rebel groups in the empire, hoping to bring them under British influence after the war. While they were at it, they also supported a coup in Greece, which kicked out the Germophile government and replaced it with a pro-British one, and then convinced them to attack the Ottomans. Soon, Arabs, Kurds, Greeks, and mutinies had turned the situation of the Ottoman Empire into a state of civil war. And under such conditions, the British demanded a peace conference in order to establish a new status quo in the Middle East. During said conference, representatives of the British, Russian, Greek, and Arab revolt governments met and drew the new borders, concessions, and so on, resulting in a new partition of the Middle East. Then there's established the Free City of Constantinople. This place is like the cool kid in school. It's got control over a super important trade route into the Black Sea, and suddenly everyone wants a piece of the action. Investors from all over the world start pouring in, and before you know it, Constantinople is booming. The population skyrockets, wealth flows like the Bosphorus, and by the end of the 1920s, it's crowned the World Trade Center. But hold your applause, because not everything is sunshine and roses. There's a bit of a rough patch at the start, something that Serbians would call trolling, or what everyone else would call the ethnic cleansing of the Muslim population of the city. Meanwhile, halfway across the globe, China's getting ready for its own special brand of chaos. By 1912, they've set up a republic. But guess who decided to declare himself emperor? None other than President Yuan Shikai. Because when you're trying to stabilize a country, the first thing you want to do is crown yourself Napoleon style. Naturally, this doesn't go over well, and soon China's back to its favorite national pastime, civil war. The world powers, always on the lookout for a good drama, start taking sides. The German Empire, fresh off their victory over France and expanding into Indochina, decides to back Yuan Shikai's empire. They offer military and economic aid, and suddenly the Republicans are on the run, with local revolts getting crushed left and right. But the USA isn't about to let Germany have all the fun. They jump into the fray, backing the Republicans, who are now pushed south as the Battle of the Yangtze River kicks off. It's a messy, bloody affair, and it drags on all the way to 1917. Then, plot twist. Yuan Shikai kicks the bucket, and his son, Yuan Keding, takes the throne. But just when you think things can't get any more complicated, Japan decides to throw its hat in the ring, backing the Qing Restoration. With Japanese help, they snatch up Manchuria, but their winning streak does not last long. The imperial forces manage to hold a line at Beijing, and suddenly it's a stalemate. The great empires are getting antsy, and tensions are rising. But thankfully, the stalemate gives the British a chance to step in and call for a ceasefire. The result? A new status quo in China. Republicans in the south, monarchists in the center, and the Japanese-backed king in the north. It's almost like a bloody game of musical chairs, and nobody knows who's going to be left standing when the music stops. Now, you might be wondering, why didn't the UK just jump in and take charge like they usually do? Well, the answer lies in the Emerald Isle itself. In 1914, Ireland is still under British control. But with no Great War to distract everyone, the Home Rule Act finally gets introduced in the summer of 1914. Cue the protest from the House of Lords, the Conservatives, and the Irish Unionists. But the British government pushes it through, and suddenly Ireland's got a taste of self-governance. But of course, not everyone is happy about it. Clashes break out between the Ulster Volunteer Force and the Irish Volunteers. By 1915, these skirmishes turn into a full-blown Irish Civil War. And suddenly, all eyes in Britain are now on Ireland. The conflict is costly, in lives, materiel, and probably a whole lot of tea and biscuits. It drags on for about a year, and the British government finally throws in the towel, drawing the Home Rule Act. By the spring of 1916, things calm down a bit, with most Irish leaders getting sentenced to death. But the damage is done. The Irish populace is furious, resentment is brewing, and Irish independence supporters are more radicalized than ever. The British strategy in Ireland takes a sharp turn, and the UK is left licking its wounds, unable to intervene in the European conflicts despite their sympathies. Germany, now having defeated France, is the top dog of Europe. They are flush with cash and decide to go on a spending spree, beefing up their navy and launching the Mittel Europa project. The goal, turn Germany into the top dog of Europe, with everyone else playing fetch. The Germans come up with a 3-step plan to dominate the continent. Step 1. back Germophile groups within other countries. Basically, find the local fans and throw money at their OnlyFans. Step 2. Flood markets with cheap goods and loans, making other economies dependent on Germany. Basically, like a car salesman trapping a US Army recruit straight out of boot camp into debt with a 24% APR on a Dodge Charger. Step 3. Support independence factions within other countries, creating new nations, and watch as they come begging for Germany's protection. They test this out on the pummeled Austria-Hungary, basically turning them into a new satellite. To the east, though, that's where things get more interesting. With Russia growing stronger by the day, Germany decides to play the long game. They start cozying up with nationalist rebel groups in places like Poland, Lithuania, and Ukraine, hoping to spark some uprisings and weaken Russia from within. However, the Russians kind of figured this out, and they come up with a plan to counter this, which is basically granting autonomy to regions like Poland and the Baltics, weakening nationalist movements and securing Russia's borders. As the 1920s roll around, Britain is starting to recover somewhat, and their banking empire is booming. The Brits, the ever-savvy financiers, step in to help Central American countries shake off American investors' influence. Thanks to their help, countries like El Salvador and Nicaragua avoid becoming full-blown banana republics, which causes the US to lose much of its influence in the region. Now, Spain and Mexico, they're like the father and son of revolutions. If there's trouble brewing, you can bet they're right in the thick of it. By the mid-1920s, Spain's in a world of hurt. The Rif War in North Africa is dragging on, the economy's tanking, and social unrest is boiling over. Strikes turn into street fights turn into full-blown rebellions, and before you know it, Spain's in the middle of a civil war. The government, led by the not-so-popular King Alfonso, is fighting against a whole host of opposition factions. You got the Carlists in the Basque Country and Navarre, Republicans in the east, and various military juntas trying to carve out their own little kingdoms. It's a hot mess, and the central government cannot handle it. They call for international intervention while trying to smooth things over with the less radical groups. Most of the juntas and Carlists end up back in the government, along with conservatives and integralists. But the radical Republican opposition isn't having it, and they consolidate their forces in the east. International intervention swoops in, convincing both sides to sign a ceasefire. King Alfonso promises a referendum in 1931, which does save Spain from a bloody civil war, but at a cost. The other European powers make Spain hand over some territories, just as a temporary measure until things kind of calm down in Spain, after which they totally pinky promise they'll give them back. Meanwhile, Mexico's no stranger to chaos either. After the Zapata rebellion, the 1920s bring in Calles and his Maximato. By 1928, Mexico's in another civil war, this time between the government and the so-called Cristeros. The conflict's all about religious issues, sparked by the government's anti-Catholic laws. Priests are banished or executed, churches are seized, and the people are not happy. The conflict gets international attention, especially when Calles says he'll defend the US and UK oil interests if they help him win. The US and the UK agree, while the Cristeros get backing from Italy and Russia, who see it as a crusade against the Calles regime. 3 years in and the war's still raging, and after the Washington Conference fiasco, it looks like 1931 will see more of the same bloody conflict. And oh look, we got to 1931 in the timeline, which is when this game starts. So if you want to see what happens, you gotta go play the game for yourself.